While treading his career path, Rudi set aside some of his earnings and invested it into various instruments. His aptitude for choosing the best investments led him to abundance of wealth. Houses, cars, villas, and apartments he possessed in great numbers. Rudi had a strong nafsu of possessiveness to all those riches he gathered through hard work. How would the trials of life to retake Rudi's nafsu of possessiveness to his wealth and fortune manifest? Ever since his career rose rapidly, Rudi always put aside some of his salary. At first, he was interested in government bonds. Afterward, he also dabbled in stocks, mutual funds, foreign currencies, and properties. His strong connections to various business owners put Rudi in a very strategic position. Rudi never hesitated to make use of this opportunity to turn profits. Whenever he was bored and in need of challenges, he liked to search for other ventures among the riskier type of investments, which would naturally be more profitable. This hobby of his landed him many acquaintances from different backgrounds outside his work environment. Among those people was a man called Donasi. Donasi was a representative for a future society investment company. At least that was the term he used while introducing himself to Rudi. The company he represented gathered funds from high-level society members and funneled it as low-interest loan to farmers and other lower members of the society. The return on investment was quite fantastical, especially given the nature of its charitability. As a relatively successful human being, Rudi also held desire to share, especially if his charitable deeds also gave him profits on the side. That was the reason he decided to invest quite a lot of money in this particular endeavor. Rudi was overjoyed because after his earthly successes, he finally took another big step forward to a more heavenly direction. For 2 years, Rudi kept getting return on this particular investment. Therefore, he decided to increase the capital he invested. In order to do this, he sold one of his apartments. Unfortunately, 2 months later, the company went under. Rudi was shocked beyond belief. It was later revealed that only very small amount of loan was actually given to farmers, not even close to the report. Apparently, the profits Rudi received all this time were his own money. Few weeks before this illegal endeavor was sniffed out, the owner had disappeared. Rudi was furious. An unbearable anger stormed in his heart. He tried calling Donasi so many times but never connected. His hope of profits as well as merits within a single step turned out to be a wishful thinking. He never suspected he could be scammed so devastatingly. Within an interconnected gathering of individuals, an action done by an individual, purposefully or not, considering human natures of insatiable, wrong and forgetful, would automatically become a trial or punishment to other individuals. Investment scams done by Donasi were decisions he made. Those decisions affected thousands of people who had put their trust and money in Doni, depended on every individual Doni lied to, based on each of their own story of life, the way they gathered their money. This incident could be a trial of life given by the all-powerful to retake their nafsu of possessiveness, or punishment for wrongdoings they did in the past. In Rudi's case, this particular incident was both a trial as well as a punishment. People who believe in a higher being tend to categorize everything detrimental that happens to them as trials of life. But when a similar thing happens to other people, they often framed it as punishment to those stupid people. Serves them right, basically. Why does this tend to happen? This is simply a behavior affected by nafsu of self-righteousness, which subtly push humans to conveniently be unaware of their own natures, namely insatiable, wrong, and forgetful. Humans who are blinded by self-righteousness will be unable to be honest with themselves, incapable to see things with balanced perspective or objectivity, having difficulties to assess and judge things fairly. They will always persecute other people while simultaneously unable to self-reflect. Unfortunately, honesty to self is a mandatory requirement for humans to pass the trials of life with a passing grade. Without it, we will always wrongfully feel adequate, even though we actually always fail. The consequences will finally catch up to us when death finally arrives and the bitter reality becomes unavoidable. Everything belongs to Allah and will return to Him. This statement, or prayer, always voiced by Muslims whenever a person died, actually has wider meanings and correlate directly to the nafsu of possessiveness, as well as human natures which are insatiable, wrong, and forgetful. Wealth, which came to humans' possession during their lives, will be meaningless to them when they have died. Regardless of their actions, it will all perish eventually. In other words, the disappearance of Rudi's money from his grasp through the scam can roughly be interpreted as a practice run for Rudi before he faces the similar thing in the future when he dies. The All-Powerful is voicing his implied verses to Rudi through this incident. Rudi is given a chance to reduce or dissipate his nafsu of possessiveness to his great wealth, so as to lessen the burden he will have to carry when he dies. Humans who possess a great affinity to all the things that they have during their lives, or in other words, having a thick nafsu of possessiveness, will always be troubled when they are called suddenly by the Almighty in the future. Worst case scenario, they will be unwilling or unable to leave the physical world and thus stay as wandering ghosts. Does that mean that the only correct answer for Rudi is to let go of his attachment to his money without looking for justice through the law? No. The dissipation of nafsu of possessiveness happens within the layer of spiritual heart, not in outer physique nor in inner physique. In other words, when people choose to do nothing even after being scammed, it doesn't necessarily mean they have managed to let go of their attachment. On similar note, when people react by never stop fighting the injustice, it also doesn't necessarily mean they have failed to cleanse their heart out of possessiveness. A human who fights crime based on fitrah, fighting injustice because it is the right thing to do, a beneficial way to dedicate their life, will have a distinct value before the Almighty, akin to heaven and earth, compared to those who do the exact same thing, but only doing it out of inability to let go of the things the all-encompassing has decided to take back from them. Therefore, regardless of the action humans choose to do, to passively wait or to fight aggressively, it is actually more important for humans to be aware that those actions must always be done under the advisement of fitrah, not nafsu, in order to gain value before the all-knowing. Can Rudi understand those messages from the Almighty implied in the incident? What answers will he choose to write in his actions? These are the trial part of that particular life story in Rudi's perspective. The next question: what is the punishment part of that incident? Rudi gained profits from his investments by utilizing various information which were ethically questionable. Rudi had rechecked within every teaching his parents cultivated into him since very young, as well as among thousands of verses he memorized in high school. None of them explicitly forbade it. In other words, technically, Rudi did not sin at all. Everything he did was still considered halal, especially since he set aside some of his profits to charity in order to cleanse his wealth. This was where he was very mistaken. Every form of virtuous teaching who set the boundaries between good and bad, promoting virtue while shaming evil, was given to humans as guidance, as examples, because human natures, insatiable, wrong, and forgetful, makes it very difficult for humans to understand the consequences of their actions in the future, both in life and in death. Whereas Allah, who created humankind, had the nature of most just, which meant every action human did would return back one way or another. In other words, the teachings were given because humans needed it. Rudi misunderstood and considered all those rules and boundaries were given because the Almighty needed humans to do it. If humans obey His commands and avoided His prohibitions, then the all-encompassing would thank humans by giving something else in return, simply put, more or less. The possessiveness, or in this case manifested specifically into greed, had succeeded in refracting Rudi's preconceptions so that he considered relationship with the greatest of all simply as another form of trade. Humans do good things or bad things have no effects whatsoever to the all just. It is all important for humans because both the benefit and the harm will be received by humans. In other words, considering relationship with the Almighty as a form of trade is a very fatal mistake indeed. The punishment for Rudi in this context was not simply because the creator did not like what Rudi had done, so he wanted to see Rudi suffered, but instead a warning. The most merciful was still care about Rudi's fitra. Nafsu of possessiveness might have already blinded Rudi's heart, but Rudi's fitra would always know that among thousands of decisions he made in his brains while amassing his wealth, Rudi actually knew that there was something wrong about his actions, the consequences which other people had to pay, the discrepancies from the guidance given by fitra. Rudi repeatedly refused to acknowledge the wrongness in his actions. Witnessing this, Rudi's fitra screamed and screamed. With a life story like Rudi's, having been supported with so much knowledge since young, Rudi should have been able to separate right from wrong. The punishment or warning Rudi experienced was an answer from the all-knowing to the screams of Rudi's fitra, a manifestation of his love to fitra, who was powerless against Nafsu. Of course, Rudi was free to decide whether to acknowledge the warning and started to reflect on his actions, or on the contrary, becoming even greedier, doing even more despicable things to recoup his loss. It has been voiced in many teachings with various sayings, according to the cultures and languages it came from, that riches and wealth humans bring along to death are only things that they use virtuously. How does the knowledge of virtue explain this? Riches utilized virtuously are only if the humans gather, store, and spend it as means of elevating their faithfulness, tools in enduring the school of life, not as the purposes. In other words, the wealth can be said to be beneficial if in everything humans do regarding it can strengthen their fitra's influence over their heart. Whenever their decisions related to those riches always push them forward, closer to the reason humans created in the first place, to become the leader over Nafsu within the cosmos. The main principles can be described as follows. 1. In their efforts to make a living, humans must go through a series of challenges. Wealth becomes truly beneficial if in those various endeavors to survive, humans are able to elevate their quality before the Almighty. 2. In keeping their assets, humans are also faced with plenty of life trials. The stored riches become beneficial if in the process, humans are able to put fitra over Nafsu in their decisions. 3. In spending their fortune, humans have so many choices in their lives. The wealth become provisions after humans have died. When thrown into uncountable intricacies of life, they are able to separate beneficial things from harmful things, and among beneficial things, can choose which is the most beneficial. Sustenance taking shape as wealth and fortune are not simply things that humans manage to gather in their efforts to survive in this life. They are not simply successes that appear after many hardships, but instead a condition when humans manage to face the 3 challenges related to wealth and pass all trials of life that always come together with it: the gathering, the storing, and the spending of fortune. If Allah is the most just, then what about many crimes and injustice humans have done, seemingly without any repercussion or punishment from the Almighty? God, the all-encompassing, was a creature who existed even before time and space. Using Nur Muhammad's as proxies, he created the cosmos, followed by life and death, including but not limited to a variety of animals and plants. After a time, humans followed closely, creatures which came to be as a product of assimilation between spirits and physical bodies. In other words, the power of the greatest entity spanned so wide that it crossed time and space, including his nature, the most just. Most humans have mistaken perceptions, comparing the justice which comes from the Almighty similar to rules which applies among human society. The greatest entity is often imagined as a judge who tries to reconcile differences between two parties, or a referee who manages competition between certain groups, or even a jury who decides whether a defendant guilty or innocent before the society. This is a very critical misconception. The truth is, every human, with all their limitations and weaknesses, including their natures, insatiable, wrong, and forgetful, must answer for every action they take individually before the Almighty. Dani chose to do the scams, thus he would answer for his actions before the Almighty. One day, across time and space, either in this life or the next, Dani must accept the consequences of his actions as manifestation of justice which belong to the Creator. When it would happen exactly was his prerogative. Meanwhile, the consequences of Dani's decisions to people who became his victims could either or both be trials and punishments, dependent on each individual's position before the Creator. Coincidentally, in Rudi's perspective, the scam was both punishments as well as trials. From 1,000 victims of Dani's, there were many different stories of life. Here are some of the examples. 1. Some of them were being tested in order to reduce their possessiveness to their wealth, purely a trial of life before the Almighty. If they managed to pass this trial with high enough sincerity in their hearts, then their level of faith would elevate. Their lives would be more fulfilling. Even though they had less wealth, their quality of life would increase. 2. Some of them were being warned because they had a warped perception on their relationship with the all-encompassing, as explained previously. If they managed to understand the warning with high enough sincerity in their hearts, then in the future, on the next trial of life, they had possibility to actually elevate their standings before the Almighty. 3. Some of them were being punished because they gathered their wealth by preying on other people. People in this category did not have any chance to elevate their faith on this occasion, though it was still possible in the future. if they could not accept this punishment sincerely, other punishments from the Creator would come repeatedly in many shapes as logical consequences of their own actions. 4. Some of them were being shielded from greed. There were distinct possibilities that they were the kind of people who would not do well with more wealth. If given more money, they tended to stain their heart, strengthening the possessiveness, self-righteousness, and praise hunger, which in turn would manifest into evil deeds. By losing their wealth, they were actually being prevented from making those bad decisions. Every individual who happened to be scammed in this occasion had a distinct story from Rudi's, that even though they were all victims of the same crime, from the same perpetrator even, the implied verses contained within the incident was different for each of them. Now, let us return to the previous question. If Allah is the most just, how come there are so many humans who do evil, yet have not incurred any repercussion or punishment from the All-Powerful? The answer is very simple. The manifestations of justice which belong to the Creator have nothing to do with the needs and satisfactions of victims to see the people who do them wrong being punished. Donnie, the scammer, chose to steal before Allah. With his unique story of life, with all his advantages and limitations, he decided to do the bad deeds. Therefore, one day, in this life or the next, he would also lose something which holds the same value. The manifestation of justice which belonged to the Almighty would come regardless of whether he regretted his actions, regardless of whether he remembered his wrongdoings, regardless of whether he apologized, and regardless of the victim's feelings about it, whether they witness it or not. Donnie could probably be caught and then put on trial. The punishment could be considered enough or not. The money he stole could be returned or lost forever. However, all those incidents would not simply be justice from the Almighty to give satisfaction to people who became his victims. Instead, there would be so many trials and punishments to all people involved in it. The implied verses from the Almighty, which had distinct meaning to each individual. Here are some of the examples. 1. Trials and or punishments to every officer of the law, whether they would uphold their duties righteously before the Almighty, doing beneficial things as fitrah commanded, or on the contrary, trying to take advantages from the situation as Nafsu dictated. 2. Trials and or punishments to the victims, whether the light from fitrah had managed to cleanse their possessiveness to the lost wealth, or not yet, waiting until the perpetrator received a fitting punishment, or maybe waiting until their money had returned, or maybe waiting until they could punish the scammers with their own hands. These choices would determine how high the victim's level of faith before the Creator. 3. Trials and or punishments to the perpetrators. In the long process of trials, what would they decide to do in face of it all? Would they regret their actions or simply act like they care? Would they return the money or lie and hide it? 4. These series of events could even become trials and/or punishments to people who simply follow the story in the social media. How would they see this incident? What would their opinions be? How would they voice it? Which in turn would bring about its own trials or punishments. In the consecutive and interconnecting series of events, each individual's action would be recorded and each would be responsible for their own actions before the Creator, sooner or later, without being able to run or hide. This is the manifestation of power of the all-encompassing, which transcends time and space.